Hello everyone, before we begin with today's episode, we wanted to ask you, have you given us a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening right now? If not, please do.
If you already did give us a rating, please tell your friends about our podcast. We really appreciate it, and thank you for listening. We're going back to 1982, Chicago.
7 people are killed by Tylenol that's filled with cyanide.
For the past 40 years, the FBI, the police, and a couple of reporters at the Chicago Tribune have been trying to bring the killer to justice.
But so far, justice has eluded them.
We're going to recap Unsealed, the Tylenol Murders, on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff. And before we start, we just want to give a warning. This episode will have spoilers for the Chicago Tribune podcast, Unsealed, the Tylenol Murders.
This is one of our full recap episodes. We're going to talk about all of the episodes in this series.
If you've already listened to Unsealed, then, or if you know the story, then you're all good.
And if you just want to hear us talk about it, fair warning for what's to come.
And as always, you can find the link to what we're discussing in our show notes.
Before we get into our discussion, let's take ourselves back to when the crime occurred. September 28th, 1982.
All right, Dee, I have a quiz for you about some September 1982 facts. So we're going to cover some heavy stuff.
Just a reminder, Jeff, I was not born then, so I may fail.
So we're talking about a pretty serious podcast. So I thought before we get into the serious stuff, let's do something a little bit lighter. So first off, I'm going to tell you there's 3 TV shows that came out that same week, actually, or thereabouts in the end of September 1982. And I want to know your familiarity with these. First off, do you know what show David Hasselhoff is famous for?
Baywatch. It was part of our Saturday routine.
Okay. That was a little bit later.
Oh.
His show before that.
The one with the car?
The one with the car. Knight Rider.
Knight Rider.
That's
also part of our... I'm trying to remember because Saturdays were like Baywatch and Gladiators featured and something else. I can't remember when Knight Rider was. That might have been a Sunday thing.
Okay. Well, it came out, first episode, September 26, 1982. September 22nd, a couple days before, Michael J. Fox... his TV show. Do you know what that was?
Oh, the one in like the workplace one?
No, that was the later one. Yeah, he had one before that where he was still a kid.
Again, reminder, I was not born. Oh, I don't know. He was still a kid?
Family Ties. Yeah, it's a great show. All right, one more TV show. This one's with Ted Danson. Set in a bar in Boston.
Cheers,
September 29th.
In that bar. I'm sure lots of people were in that bar, but I was in that bar. Spent my last few dollars buying myself and my friend a drink in that bar.
Amazing.
We were finishing our American trip.
All right, let's go to music.
Okay.
Top 3 songs. Jack and Diane. John Cougar.
Jack and Diane.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Steve Miller Band. Abracadabra. No? Okay.
No singing.
What about this one? Survivor, Eye of the Tiger.
Never heard it before.
This was, of course,
the
same year as Rocky 3. So, also around that same time, September 30th, Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska came out, and a few weeks later, Michael Jackson's Thriller came out. Okay. All right. Those are our 1982 facts.
I enjoyed those. Thanks, Jeff. Setting the scene, as we said before this gets all serious, we're setting the scene. Our plan for some of these episodes is to give you a really in-depth, this is kind of what happened. Sorry, not in-depth. Woo! A really high-level overview of what happened, and then we kind of delve into the pieces that we liked and didn't like and give you some details. This is very effing hard for this podcast because so many details, so many things happened. Jeff, you managed to get a timeline that you've
Yeah.
pasted into our notes. Tell us the length of that timeline.
Yeah, so we'll link to this in the show notes. The Chicago Tribune, the people who put out this podcast, made a timeline of the events that they cover. I took it and just pasted it into a Word doc just to see kind of like how long it was. It was 13 pages, 13 single-spaced pages long. So
Front and back. No, it wasn't actually. It's
that's
like
not
6 pages front to back and then one extra.
So I
For
thought we could
Friends
just
reference
spend.
for anyone who cares.
I thought we could just spend the next, I don't know how many minutes just reading. How would that be?
Although I think that people would really like to hear us just read, and then this happened, and then this happens. That would make for a really good podcast. It's kind of like in The Simpsons, you know, when Homer. Were you a fan of The Simpsons?
Mm-hmm,
When
sure.
Homer joins the barber, the barber street
Barbershop quartet.
barbershop quartet, and then
Yes.
Barney goes off and does his own thing, and he like hooks up with. Do you remember the Gothic woman? And he produces like the song, and he's like, "This is going to be a jam," and it's just him burping and saying number 8, number 8, number 8, number 8. That's all the song is. That's what I feel like people. That's how I think people would view us reading that timeline.
That's amazing. I think this recap is off to a great start.
We've really got into the deets there. We also have often take note of like the important people that we come across in the podcast. And this list is so long. I think Jeff just gave up halfway through. It was like, pack this. There's too many names. Like, I'm terrible with remembering people's names. I'm often misnaming people in our podcast, but like, this is wild.
Yeah, can I just say, I think so. I did this for our preview episode where we had 6 of the 7 victims. So we didn't get to the 7th victim until I think the 2nd or 3rd episode. And then there were a few other people related to some of the victims. There was like the fire lieutenant and the doctor, like a handful of people who were in the first episode, right? I think it was a total of 6 victims and about maybe 6 or 7 other people plus the 2 co-hosts. So that was altogether, that's like 12 to 15 people in the first episode. So that's the first episode. And I kind of expected the subsequent episodes would like come back to some of those people, kind of focus more on those people. I stopped adding names to this list. I think I had about 30 or 40, no, more than 30. I think it's about 35 people.
Like you're only on what episodes? 6 or something, like, is it even 6?
Yeah. It's an absurd amount of people that are
so many people. And it was really like, I don't know about you, but like, did you find it hard to kind of remember who was who in the zoo? Like, it felt to me like I was.
Yeah. No, I kept going back to this list and thinking, did I already write down this person's name? Okay, this was another FBI agent. This was another cop. This was a different lawyer. This was, okay, no, this was that person's cousin. This was that person's friend.
And do you know what? The thing that I found frustrating about it is like, I feel like they were trying to, like, obviously there was so many details in the story, but they introduced a lot of people that didn't need to be introduced. Like, they didn't add enough value to the story. I didn't think to warrant me trying to remember their name.
No, because I think in other podcasts we've listened to, we really like when the story is kind of told through the people who were there and who were affected. There's just so damn much plot in this one, right? Like, it's 40 years of plot.
But like, when we look back at Inside the Crime, the Una Linsky murder, like, there was a lot of people. There was a lot of happened. Maybe there's not obviously as much plot maybe involved in it, but like, I don't know, it's just told better. Even the thing about Pam, like, there was a load of people in it actually, and the retrievals, there was loads of people in there too, but they managed to focus in on the people that kind of made sense. Like, if it's spanning 40 years, there's going to be a lot of people. What was interesting, I thought, with this podcast was there was a lot of people who had a lot to say from all these different sides. So in other podcasts we've reviewed, there isn't that many people, so it feels slightly unbalanced, and you're not sure like if you're really getting like a full idea, like a full picture. You're not hearing from all sides. We literally hear from all sides, one person, like main person, I suppose, in this that we wouldn't hear from is it Roger Arnold? Because
Right.
he's passed away.
One of the main suspects. So there's two,
He's-
I think, and I wanted to kind of just quickly kind of summarize this. So there's two main suspects. Roger Arnold is the one that the Chicago police think did it. And then there is, oh my gosh, Jim Lewis or Robert Richardson. To make it a little extra confusing, he has multiple aliases. But Jim Lewis is, I think, the name. Lewis is the name we're going to probably refer to him as. So there's the two suspects. Then there's the people in their various orbits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of circumstances around them. So, and I mentioned that Roger Arnold is the one that the Chicago police think did it, specifically Charlie Ford and Jimmy Gilday. So we get a lot from those two guys, especially Charlie Ford. But then there's the ones that the FBI think did it, which is Jim Lewis. So we get a bunch of FBI agents, but then all the people kind of in Jim Lewis's orbit, which is a lot of people because he's the one who was
so many people.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy who kind of like kept getting back into the spotlight over the 4 decades that this happened. So that's like, I thought about like bucketing the characters by like doing like a graph or like a Venn diagram of them, and then I got tired and didn't. That's where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. I think that like that was a good summary. Like I really feel like it would be hard pushed to go through the summary of it. Before we delve into our conversation even further, I do think it'd be just interesting to take a look at the episodes really, really briefly.
Okay.
So we start off, obviously we've already gone through episode 1. It focuses a lot on the victims and the circumstances around that day in September 1982. The second episode is Turf War. It's basically about police wanting, like, who owns what? That's mine, that's yours. Sharing is caring, lads. Move on and get on with it. But anyway, so that's what episode 2 is about.
Just to elaborate on that just a little bit. So it's
Did I not give enough context there? Because that's how I felt about episode 2.
Okay. I did think that, well, we can move on from this, but a couple things about episode 2 that I thought were interesting about the turf war. So you've got the FBI versus the Illinois State Police, there's the Chicago City Police, and then there is the right. So these crimes, these murders, these deaths happen in a couple different counties. So you've got the respective police from those different counties. And
For Irish people, the American police system is mad here. They all like, it's like if you're from Tala, you have a different police force than if you're from Terenure, and if a murder happens in one place and not the other, you know, they're fighting over who owns it.
Well, they all want to own it.
Context for how weird it is here.
They all want to own it, and they don't want to share leads, and they don't want to help each other. Basically, there is also significant conflict between the FBI, so the federal agents, and the local police, because the FBI had been investigating the Chicago police for corruption. And so there's a lot of friction that is sort of inherent there. That's all I have to say about that. We can keep going.
Was, just while we're on it, like, did it add to the episode? Like, there's turf wars going on all of the time with police. Like, really, do you think it added to the podcast to know all of that? Like a full episode on it?
I actually think it did, because I think the conflict between the FBI and the Chicago police is how we get these two paths of Arnold versus Lewis. Which one is like they both are convinced they have the right guy, and they can't both be right.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree that it should have been a segment. It should have been like a conversation had in one episode, like as part of an episode. I think I fell asleep a few times during this episode. I found it very boring.
The other thing that we get in this episode, though, is the seventh victim, Paula Prince, who is the flight attendant from United Airlines. We get her story, which is brief.
We do get her story. I didn't fall asleep during that. Like, that was important.
Yeah. Okay.
But the rest of the episode,
we can go on to 3.
Okay, episode 3. What's the name of episode 3?
Suspects. I
put down Lewis versus Arnold. I don't know why, but I knew looking at it wasn't right. Okay. Give me your thoughts, Jeff.
So, episode 3 is where we get this handwritten letter that goes to Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol. And so that I thought was fascinating. I actually went and looked up that letter. I have it in my notes here. So it's
we can probably post that on our Instagram.
We can, yes. It's pretty easy to find. But I feel like this is a pivotal turn in the whole investigation, right? Like this is, so it comes out that Lewis sent this letter. He's trying to set up Fred McCahey, who his wife used to work for.
To set up.
Maybe, yeah. Like the whole thing just seems like he's just trying to get attention for himself ultimately, right? Like, which seems to be what he does for the next several decades. But yeah, I mean, this is a lot happens in this third episode. But I think the most pivotal thing is he sends this letter, which suddenly makes everyone look at this guy like he becomes the number one suspect for the FBI.
Yeah, he puts himself in the center of it. And then we also get introduced to Arnold in this episode.
Yes, Roger Arnold.
And I mean, listening to it. Okay, listening to episode 3. Jeff, who did it? Just on episode 3.
Well, okay, so Roger Arnold
has cyanide in his home.
Was known to have cyanide. Worked with one of the victim, Mary Reiner's father.
In a warehouse, or in the back of a shop that stocked the Tylenol, which was one of the places that it was bought from.
Was known to be angry and disgruntled.
Mm-hmm.
When they searched his home, when Chicago police searched his home, they found a book on poisoning, 4 handguns, a rifle, and a plane ticket to Thailand.
A one-way ticket to Thailand.
A one-way ticket to Thailand.
4 days later.
Yeah. Can I also say, so Ford and Gilday, the Chicago cops, arrest him, and one of my favorite things in the whole show is they talk about how they're going to get him to confess by buttering him up, and they take him out for a Chicago steak sandwich.
It's so good. Do you know what was so nice about that, like that aspect of it? I feel like anytime that the police have been involved, which is every episode we're talking about, the majority of the time we're like, they're not doing a good job. These 2 policemen seem to have their shit together. They did a good job. They were not heavy handed and going down fist on table route. They were like, let's bring him out. Let's chat to him. Let's kind of butter him up and try and get him to talk to us. I don't know. I thought it seemed really clever policing.
But again, back to episode 2, this is where that conflict comes in, because what happens, they're trying to butter him up. They're trying to get him to confess. And then when it comes out to the other people on the task force that they've got this suspect, all the bigwigs come in and they take over the interrogation. And suddenly Roger Arnold clams up, stops talking. Right. So it's one group of police or FBI agents getting in the way of the others and taking over the investigation. That's where that maybe this crime could have been solved if they just stayed out of each other's way.
But could they not have said it in those 2 sentences? I don't think that they needed a full episode to explain. It's not as if a turf war or people bigwigs coming in and trying to take the glory of a big case is oh, I've never heard that happen before. People have heard that happen before. So
sure.
Just put it as 2 sentences in. Don't make me listen to 35 minutes of it.
Well, we got some other interesting things in episode 3. If we can jump back to the letter, so the Lewis letter where he's framing Fred McCahey. First of all, Fred McCahey, who owned this Lakeside Travel where Lewis's wife worked, also the heir to the Miller beer fortune. That's a fun fact.
That is a fun fact.
Also, I think it was the FBI who was getting into the space of criminal profiling, which was a new thing at the time.
Some of it was so weird, though. Because, I've seen, a lot of criminal profiling, whether it's, documentaries or, TV shows. But I feel like one of them was to do with, a blue suit and a red tie, and I was
the blue suit and the red tie. Yeah.
Okay. Look, hurting animals
what did they say
when they're
about
younger.
Blue suit and red tie? What was the context for that?
That he might be comfortable or something with if you wear a blue suit and a red tie. It was so bizarre. It comes in a later episode, but I had to rewind and be like, are they saying that's a profile? That's that's like something that would be on someone's Tinder profile. Like, I like someone in a blue suit and a red tie. Like, it's not anyway. Like, you know, you'd usually hear like of like they would hurt animals. They might have had like an estranged relationship with their mother or their father, or they might have not have had any siblings, or they might have gone through trauma. Like, these are the things you hear, not that they might like someone in a blue suit and a red tie.
Yeah, that was a little odd. But it does come back later. It becomes important later on. All right, should we talk about 4?
Okay.
4 is called Gone to the Lake.
Shocker. Like, why is it that the episodes or the people in these podcasts that get me are always the older people? I loved this episode. Raymond West.
Raymond West. You want to talk about Raymond West for a bit?
I don't know if I can, Jeff. I properly adored this episode. I'd listened to it a couple of times over without listening to the rest of it. I really, I didn't adore it. I was really invested in it. I liked hearing about him. I can't say I adored it because it's horrendous. It's infuriating. It's bizarre. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know I do this. I need to give the context. You give the context.
Let's give some context on Raymond West. All right, so we jump back in time, right? So the crime occurred in 1982. We're going back to 1978. So we're in Kansas City. Actually, we go back and forth between Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, which are just across the border from each other. So Raymond West is this guy. He's in his early 70s. He's described as a guy who wears a wig and glasses, counted his pennies, had a bunch of money saved up, good Samaritan, walked around the neighborhood. One of his fun facts that I loved was he would give his old newspapers to the florist to wrap flowers in, which made me think, is that something I should be doing? Like, is that just a nice person gesture that maybe I should start doing? He collects figurines, generally just like nice guy around the neighborhood. If he's going to write a check for more than $100, he goes into the bank and tells them so that they know to expect that. So people knew him, but so he's friends with Jim Lewis, right? Like Jim Lewis is his
tax
guy, right? But one of Raymond West's friends, Charles Banker, gets worried about him, disappears. Raymond West disappears, and we get basically the story of how Charles Banker is convinced something went wrong. Turns out something went wrong. Raymond West gets murdered.
It was really so basically, what's your man's name, his mate?
Wait, which one?
The guy, the friend.
Charles Banker?
Yeah. So Charles Banker goes up to the door of Raymond's house when he can't get him on the phone, and there's a padlock on the door, and he's like, that's weird. And he goes and looks in the blinds, and he says things just look off.
Yeah.
So then he goes and he comes back I don't know, a couple of days later. He saw Jim Lewis and asked him about it, and he was like, oh, it's all fine. And then when he went back the next time, there was a note left on the door, gone to the lake with my girlfriend. And right. Charles was like, you don't have a girlfriend.
Doesn't have a girlfriend. Yeah.
And also, so then he he basically goes to remove the padlock, and he's like, this can't be here. And Jim Lewis sees him and comes up, and there's a moment. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm removing it. And Jim Lewis sees him and picks up a hammer.
That Charles Banker was using he was actually replacing the padlock. He was putting a different padlock on the door.
You're right. Yeah, he was replacing it. And he stands there with the hammer, and then he leaves, but he doesn't go too far. He drives around the corner and waits and watches.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going with that. So Charles Banker gets the police to come to break into the house. They go in he goes in with the police. They look around. Charles Banker is like, hey, this chair wasn't in this spot, and this all looks like it's out of place, and there's a weird other note that's left on a table. And the police are like, it's fine, and they leave.
Well, the interesting thing about the note is it's signed Raymond West, and he's like, he doesn't sign his name Raymond West. He only signs it Ray. So
right.
Probably I feel like we've spoken about this far too many episodes. It's like he was trying to learn how to copy someone's signature for a note. Maybe.
Also, everybody needs a friend like Charles Banker.
I know, right?
Right? Is just not going to give up until he finds out what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right. So banker then convinces the police to come back. And on the second time they come back, suddenly they notice bloodstains all over the place.
I mean, come on.
Then they go to the attic, and that's where they find the body. So,
and it's gruesome, guys. It's really gruesome. It's dismembered. The hips are broken. Was it his left leg or his left
legs
arm?
are cut off.
But what was not there? His hand?
I don't remember. I know there was a lot of description of the way the body was kind of dismembered and tied up
But the infuriating thing about it all basically was like nobody could figure out what had caused his death because of the dismemberment and because it had been a long time the body had decomposed. So as much as it seemed so like
well, yeah, and actually, hey, wait, we're getting into stuff that happens in episode 5. There's a tangent at the end of episode 4. So before we get into kind of the further investigation of Raymond West, we get a little other backtrack where you go back to Jim Lewis's childhood, and we kind of get his life story. So, which is, I think, found this part fascinating. I know you're critical of the structure of this overall podcast, and I agree with you there. But like, if you extract some of these bits and pieces, I think there's some really interesting content.
Oh, I totally agree. I think it sounds like we could have got more about Jim Lewis's background, like from what they said. Like he grew up in a tumultuous family situation.
Well, both of his parents, I think, at different junctures abandoned him. He ended up adopted.
Mm-hmm.
At 19, he goes missing. They find him in a pond. He becomes violent. So
he was seemingly trying to attempt suicide.
Right. So okay, and actually a little bit before that. So yeah, he had gotten adopted, but his adopted father dies, and his adopted mother remarries. So his stepfather, I don't know what you'd call that. Anyway, and Jim Lewis have conflict. After he goes missing, he basically threatens his stepfather.
He was annoyed that they found him.
Yes.
And he beats him up, basically.
Yeah.
He beats his stepfather up.
But then we get some positive things in his life. So he does go to college for a little bit. That's where he meets his wife, Leanne. They have a baby, Tony, in 1969. But she has Down syndrome and a heart defect. She has a first surgery for the heart defect, which she comes through. She has a second surgery. She's 5 years old, and she dies, I think, shortly after or during the surgery.
Yeah, and by all accounts, he was an excellent father and very into Tony's life and into making her happy. And it seemed to be like the light that he maybe needed. Tony seemed to be the light that he needed in his life. And that's something that ends up seemingly being very important at the end of this podcast. So we will come back to that.
Right. So that, just to be clear, so that happened. So Tony is born in 1969. She dies at 5. So I presume that's around 1974 or so. So 1974, we're in Kansas City. 1978 is when the whole Raymond West bit happens. And it seems like after his daughter's death, Jim Lewis starts up this tax business. And that's how he connects with Raymond West. Raymond West apparently used to always come by, walk by his house. They were neighbors, and was very friendly with Tony. Like, he'd always wave, because he seems like the kind of guy who would wave to anybody, definitely to a little girl. So just a friendly neighbor guy. All right, that's 4. So then we get 5, which is called Breadcrumbs, and this is where we get the bit about Raymond West, all the things that happened to him. And then we get more.
Basically, more or less, the police find shed load of evidence against Raymond West. How was it? 200 checks, 200 of Raymond West's checks, written out to Jim Lewis in his car. They find the twine that was used, that Raymond West his body was tied up with. They find that in his car. They find blood, I think, at one point.
They find a hair in the bathroom on the soap that matches Jim Lewis. Yeah, I think Jim Lewis. There's blood that matches. There's also a nylon rope in Jim Lewis's car with slip knots, like he was practicing slip knots.
Yeah. But then basically it turns out the police forgot to read him his Miranda rights, and so all of the evidence has to be thrown out and destroyed. The destroyed was a bit much. I felt like it didn't have to be destroyed, but anyway, it was all destroyed.
There was a bit here. So James Bell, who's one of our cast of 1,000 characters, who was the prosecutor working this case in 1979. He was fresh out of law school. And they ask him, okay, so how many cases have you worked where basically because of a failure to read the Miranda rights was it dismissed, basically, when it would seem like a slam dunk case? And he said only one. His whole career, only one. It's the only time that ever happened to him.
Wild. And then I was thinking, I know we're in like the 70s and 80s and this, most of it, but I'm like, geez, if only they had Google locations or GPS or CCTV, like he could have been a great way to find him. Anyway, then we jump back to Arnold, and basically Arnold gets out of prison after being put in prison for pulling a gun on someone. So when they had arrested him originally in Chicago, they didn't have enough to try him for the Tylenol murders, but they did have like a few things that they could put him away for. So they did. And then he gets out, and then he's annoyed because someone had told the police, tipped them off to where he was, which allowed them to catch him, which allowed them to put him behind bars. This guy is Marty Sinclair.
Yeah. Marty Sinclair is the guy that Roger Arnold that tipped off the police about Roger Arnold. Yeah.
So Arnold is in a pub. He's drinking a lot. Someone says, that's Marty Sinclair drinking over there with his mates. He turns around. He looks. He goes out for, I don't know, did they say a burger? Which is very random. But he goes off for a burger or something. And then he comes back. The supposed Marty Sinclair leaves the pub with his mates. Arnold follows him, more or less. Says, like, why did you tip off the police? And shoots him. More or less, it turns out this was mistaken identity. This was not Marty Sinclair. It was Jack Stannis. I have Stanislaw down, and then later on I'm like, is it Stannis Haw?
I think it's Stannis Shaw.
Stannis Shaw, okay.
I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, the wrong guy, not Marty Sinclair. He shoots the wrong guy and kills him.
One tidbit that's an aside that came from this is Jack Stanishaw's daughter, one of his daughters, speaks, and it was really touching and interesting to hear her speak. And one thing that she said is, like, at the funeral, like, as people are coming up to like give their condolences, she said, I'll never forget the last person that came up to see me. I had a double take. It was Marty Sinclair, so the guy that Arnold thought he was shooting, and she said he was so like my dad. Yeah, she's like, what, 6 years old? She's young. Yeah. At the time. Yeah, that was really tragic. Yeah. I mean, the idea, first of all, that Roger Arnold goes and hunts down this guy that he feels like turned him into the police and shoots him, and it's the wrong guy. It's a guy who looks like him. And then we cut to, the victim's daughter talking about it. I mean, that was rough. And like, then Arnold is like, so then basically he runs away for like a night, calls his lawyer, and then is like, he hands himself in. So I don't know, he was drunken in a pub, so I don't know whether the drink got the better of him. Like, if he was going to hand himself in anyway, it just seemed silly. Anyway, he went away for the murder. But yeah. Okay. So that's the end of episode 5. So there's 3, 6, 7, and 8 still to come. And I feel like this is where it this is where it takes a turn. Like, I feel like the last 3 episodes are where we get a lot more just sort of rambling around. We've already covered a significant amount of plot. Yeah. But episode 6 is Walking Crime Wave. That's the name of the episode. And there's a point at the beginning of this where they say, we're going to divide this story into 3 chapters. And I'm like, wait, we're on episode 6, and now you're dividing it into chapters. And then the first chapter is most of the episode 6. I'm like, what? I don't understand what's happening in the organization of this podcast. But chapter 1 in episode 6
is called doodling.
Hmm.
So at this point, Jim Lewis is in prison. This is 1983. So we're sort of moving in a linear way, although we jump back and forth a little bit. He's in prison because he sent a letter. He sends a lot of letters, but he sent a letter to President Reagan. So Ronald Reagan, who was president at the time, like an extortion letter, basically.
The
So
neck
that was a
on
letter.
this lad.
Yeah. While he's in prison, he writes another letter to the FBI saying, "Hey, I could be helpful to you. Let me help you solve crime. I know a lot about fraud. I know a lot about a lot of things. Let me help you."
I felt like this is basically the plot for White Collar. Do you know? Have you seen White Collar?
No.
It's like terrible and great all at the same time. Basically, some like a criminal is turned and he's used by the feds to like solve different like highfalutin crimes. But anyway, then
Okay.
it also jumps
Yeah.
and it's like Tylenol. They get a neat new seal and a new cap, and they're like their numbers are up. And I was like, cool, good to hear. A Tylenol investigation was dwindling.
I want to say though, this is okay. So I take issue with some of the ways that this was structured and some of the pacing of it and the amount of detail and the amount of people in it. But this section, chapter 1 of episode 6, has some of the most fascinating things in it. All right, so we get these FBI agents, Lane and I forget the other one, but Lane is one of the ones we hear the most from. And so there's a couple of things that they say. One is that they're like, yeah, we'll meet with this guy. And they're hoping that he has what they call a psychotic leak, which is one of the things I Googled to be like, what's a psychotic leak? Basically, if they just keep talking to this guy about the crime, they think eventually he'll just let slip that he did it. And they have this thing, this move they call a bank shot, which is one of my favorite things to do when I'm playing pool, is the bank shot, where instead of just like kind of asking him point blank about what he did, they say something like, "Oh, you know, Jim Lewis couldn't do this crime. He's not smart enough." And then Jim will be like, "Oh, no, this is how you would do it." Like that kind of like indirect way of like almost like insulting him so that he feels like he has to prove and explain himself. And they also say to him, they ask him like, why do you think that the person who did these Tylenol murders used extra strength Tylenol? Like, was it so that like kids wouldn't take it? Like, because they, kids would take more like children's Tylenol. He's like, no, because there's something extra in the capsule, which I don't know. Like, clearly he's thought about it. Like, clearly I don't know this. And then he gets some paper and he does these drawings. Which, did you look at these drawings?
No.
You should look at these drawings. They're in the notes, and they're linked on the Chicago Tribune has them. First of all, he's a really good artist.
Oh, he is.
But he does these drawings that he describes
not
like,
drawn to scale.
Yeah. They say not drawn to scale, but he describes basically how one would, if he were one to do this, fill these Tylenol capsules with cyanide. What, like, different methods of doing it, different ways of filling them, as though he has spent a significant amount of time thinking about it. And yeah, it's kind of like terrifying and amazing. And yeah, so those drawings are all available. You can check those out.
But like, he's just spent a bit of time in prison, and he's inserted himself into a crime, and he gets fixated on stuff. So I don't think it's that shocking. I feel like it fits his profile. He likes blue suits, red ties, and drawn pictures.
Do you remember? I don't remember when this happened, but there was one point in the early 2000s where O.J. Simpson did that. Like, it was like a book. In an interview, it was like, "If I did it."
Oh, God.
And it was basically like him basically saying like, if I killed those two people, here's how I would have done it. I feel like this is the exact same thing, where it's like, he's not saying he did it, but if he did it, here's exactly how he did it.
I don't know. It makes me feel like you think Jim Loomis did it as opposed to Arnold.
I do think Jim Lewis did it. Do
Interesting.
you not? Do you think Roger Arnold did it?
I'm just like, they found cyanide, the one-way ticket to Thailand. Like, they'd so much up against him.
Do you think Jim Lewis just loved the attention?
Yeah. I think from his MO from previous scenarios, taking away the Raymond West thing, which I have some thoughts on that, but I think he just wants to either extort money or insert himself where he's not needed because he wants attention and he wants a focus in his life. And that's what I feel about him.
I don't know.
I mean, like,
Maybe
even his friendship in the next episode, which we'll get to, like even the jailhouse snitch, right? So apparently there's 5 people across in different places. So apparently the significance increases that Jim Lewis has said, like, I did the Tylenol murders.
Right. So that's chapter 2 of episode 6.
Which is about is it even 2 sentences long?
No, it's real short. And then chapter 3 is also very short. Chapter 3 is parole, maybe. Where basically Jim Lewis is up for parole in 1989. And then...
Okay, so I have questions about this. In the middle of the parole, they're like, actually, we'll also consider whether you might have been involved in the Tylenol murders. And they say,
right. So to be clear, he's in prison for attempted extortion, the letter he sent to Ronald Reagan, not for the Tylenol. Like, not so no one was ever officially charged with the Tylenol murders.
No.
And then, this panel that is reviewing whether he should be put up for parole is like, for what I didn't understand the law around here, but they're willing to like basically consider whether he is the most likely person to have committed the Tylenol murders. They say, yes, you are. Therefore, we're not going to give you parole for this other crime.
Like, is this normal? 2 lads just sitting there decide. Seems like unlawful and like,
I don't know.
Bizarre.
But anyway, so that was 1989. 1995, he does get out of prison.
Start speaking to the reporters.
Yeah. All right, that's the end of 6. Should we go on to 7?
Oh my God, this is going to be so long.
We're almost there.
This is what I said we shouldn't do, and then I was the one to launch into doing it. But anyway.
I don't know. Here we are. We're at 7. 7 is called friendship.
I do have to say, I loved the little snippet introducing, like, a lot had changed in Chicago between 1982 and the 1990s. Like, there's all these snippets from, like, different things, like even Oprah introducing herself and spelling out her name. I'm Oprah Winfrey, O-P-R-A-H. Or she probably said
that's not how she said it. Yeah. R-A-H.
O-P-R-A-H, but she didn't sound like a pirate.
No, although you just sounded like a pirate.
I know, that's because Americans sound like pirates when they say the letter or. R.
Also
anyway.
H.
O-P-R-A-H. Is that how you say it? H.
Yeah. Yep.
H.
H.
Anyway, H.
Anyway, Oprah. We all know Oprah.
So anyway, I did like the little snippet at the start of that. So Arnold in the mid-90s, like, he's let out. He serves half of a 30-year sentence for murdering someone.
Yep. Gets out in 1988 and gets a job.
Half of his 30-year sentence for murdering someone in cold blood, murdering the wrong person in cold blood.
He was very apologetic. He also got his bachelor's degree in prison, which was a fun fact.
That was pretty cool. Anyway.
The way it's presented in the show, Roger Arnold, I understand you think he was the Tylenol murderer. I guess I don't, but he seems incredibly apologetic and like he made a drunken mistake and he regretted it the rest of his life. Once he gets out too, like, he's apparently like haunted by what he did.
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing that about Steve Shulman. Basically, this guy loves Steve Shulman. He basically owns like a company and Arnold starts working for him. He didn't realize about his murder conviction before he hired him, but when he found out, he was like, it's fine. He worked for about 7 to 8 years. And then Arnold came to him and said, like, I'm having a really bad time. I can't stop seeing Jack Stanislaw. He's having hallucinations. Turns out he wasn't able to get like his prescription for
depression. Yeah, it was depression meds. Yeah. I think so. Maybe I'm wrong.
And someone had said, like, I think that their hallucinations are part of like the withdrawal for that. I thought it was anyway. Stanishaw's daughter as well comes back here, which I thought was really interesting to hear like her point of view on him, which was basically like, I don't want someone else to more or less suffer if like they're apologetic or whatever. I don't know. I just thought it was really nice that she came back in at this point. Anyway, he quits his job. Steve Shulman starts to have a weird feeling about him, feels like maybe something's wrong, and like goes and finds him in his apartment.
Yeah, so he apparently fell, hit his head, and he died. But that was it. If I have this right, that was in 2008. So there's a big time jump there.
Oh, because it starts off being like 1990s. I mean, he got out mid 1990s.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then we jump back to Jim Lewis, who we basically stick with for the rest of the show. Yeah. There's a couple things here that happen in episode 7 that I feel like we should talk about.
Nicholson. So he becomes mates with this lad who owns a
Roger
grocery
Nicholson.
store, who hosts a public access show. Is that how you say it? Public access show?
Yeah,
Is that like... Okay.
Called the Cambridge Rag. This is in Boston, I presume. Cambridge. Yeah. Before that, though... Lewis goes back to prison. He goes back to jail, not prison, in 2004. So he started up this business with, there's this woman involved in the business, and he gets arrested. And I wrote this down because this is the list of charges. So he was arrested in 2004 for aggravated rape, kidnapping, assault and battery, indecent assault, drugging for sexual intercourse, and drugging to confine. He served 3 years in jail. Well, he was in jail for 3 years, and then eventually the woman decided not to press charges. Charges were dropped. So that was his 2004 to, I guess, about 2007. So Jim Lewis is back in jail, which, yeah. And then he gets out, and Roger Nicholson is like, "Hey, man, come sleep on my couch. Come hang out in my apartment. Let's
watch me play online poker. We can verbally spar."
Yeah, Nicholson plays online poker. They eat McDonald's. They watch MSNBC.
What do you make of this relationship?
I mean, it seems like Lewis loves attention, and Nicholson also loves attention, and these two guys find each other. Nicholson is much younger guy. At this point, Lewis is older, right? This is the mid 2000s, and Nicholson seems really like keen on getting Lewis onto his TV show. I think he thinks it's like a big get for his show. That's my read on it. I don't think they come out and say that.
No, that seems so odd. But anyway,
it was odd. Yeah,
it's very odd. So we jump back. So now Lewis is back in contact with Lane, who is the
FBI agent. Yeah,
FBI agent. We're in 2006 now, and Task Force 2 is established.
Right.
And it's deemed like Tylenol Murders is a good cold case to reopen. Side note, did you ever watch Cold Case?
I think I've seen a couple. Yeah.
Great show. Loved it because they used, similar to like this episode at the start where they talk, like they do the news snippets, but like with Cold Case, whatever year it happened in, they use the music throughout from that year, which I really liked.
That's a nice touch. I like that. Okay.
Anyway.
Task Force 2.
Yeah.
So there's this like ruse where they pretend that they're writing a book, and they kind of wine and dine Lewis. They're all just trying to get him to confess, right? Like they're trying to get information out of him.
Yeah.
There's also like at one point the FBI raids Lewis's condo and his like storage, whatever type of storage he has. There's a piece of paper where it's like the headline is like, it says, "Yes, I am a killer, but I have 10 good reasons."
Yeah.
That was a little odd.
That's very odd.
Also, he has like a detailed like diary of some sort of where he was in 1982, but there's this gap from September 25th to September 28th, which would be when the Tylenol, the cyanide placement was happening. There's a lot of evidence, right? There's a lot of evidence that's sort of like around him.
He goes on to Nicholson's show, and one of the quotes like from it is he said, I think Nicholson asks Lewis, do you think they're ever going to solve it? And he said, if the FBI are playing fair, they won't find anything.
Yeah,
And then we're left.
What do you make of that?
Is it attention seeking? It's just so hard to know.
Why go on the show? Why write all these letters? What, like that? I know
attention.
You're skeptical.
He's inserting himself because he knows they have nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. All right. Can we jump to 8 or is there anything else on 7?
Yeah, like towards the end of 7, they're like, and then we have this new evidence. A
Can I just, like-
PowerPoint. It was the softest, like, dramatic end to a sentence ever. Like, what's the new evidence? A feckin' PowerPoint. Like, that's the most boring thing I've ever heard. Oh no, not the PowerPoint.
Hey, I'm a real big fan of PowerPoint. I like
It's not
making
that
a
I
good
dislike
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, but I'm like, you're not like, how is that your dramatic end? And then we realized it was the PowerPoint. It's
Well,
just
actually, I don't remember exactly, but I think was it Macbeth or Hamlet? I think Act 5 is called the PowerPoint. Is that
sounds right. Accurate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, to go from like all of this kind of activity in episodes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 7 is called Friendship.
And then 8 is called
called-
feckin' PowerPoint. Like, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a
My first note on episode 8 is, Jesus, I'm bored by the name of it. What I really disliked about episode 8 is we're back to the same vibe that we were at the start of episode 1, where they're just stalking him. They're like sitting in the McDonald's parking lot across the street from his
These
apartment.
are the hosts of the show.
Oh yeah, sorry, the host of the show. They tried to FaceTime him. Like, why do they have all his info? Like, did he just give it to police and police have just leaked it? Then they're like outside his apartment block or whatever, and his neighbor lets them in. I'm like, maybe don't do that, neighbor. Like, you see all these people like huddled together wanting to get in. Maybe don't let them in.
So
And
yeah,
then
there's a prolonged bit where they're like they go into a McDonald's and they're just like going up to like old men
random people being like,
asking,
is it
"Are you
you?
Jim Lewis?" My two all caps notes from this section of this episode are, first of all, my first note is ugh, and my second note is uncomfortable.
Ugh,
Like,
as in
ugh.
like
I don't like this. I don't like what's
ugh.
happening. Yeah,
EUGH.
UGH. I would spell that UGH.
Ugh.
Same thing. That's what you said. Yeah.
Uggs are like shoes. They're boots. Ugg boots.
Yes, I was thinking about the shoes with the fur
I
lining.
was like,
That's
where are you going with this?
yeah, that's exactly
Anyway,
what.
That's
Winter
not how
in
I
Boston.
pronounce that. I was actually literally talking to someone at work today about like how I'd pronounce it, because I obviously say it quite often in our like DMs and work.
Ugh.
EUGH.
You're talking about the boots.
And someone said to me, like, what do you mean by that? And they were like, do you mean like ugh, or do you mean like ugh? And I was like, oh no, I mean like ugh. That's so annoying. Anyway.
That's an amazing conversation.
I'm so you're welcome everyone for that tidbit. But anyway, ugh.
I think we just found our like pull quote from this episode.
Anyway, like, it was boring, first of all. And then I have to say, like, at the end of it, after they're stalking him, he said, like, and they're like, talk to us. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. And he says, ladies, I hope you don't think I'm being too rude to you, but he's like, I want to go. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't done, by the sounds of it, a lot of what Jim Lewis has done in my life, but I would be like, feck right off, like, leave me alone. Like, it was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean they're out of breath, basically like chasing him down.
They
the
ask
street.
him to slow down at one stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which also is funny, because like, he's what, in his 70s or something at this stage.
I will say, I listen to a lot of the NPR politics podcast, and their reporters who work on Capitol Hill talk about how when you do that job where you're like chasing senators and congress people around on those like marble floors, that you got to wear comfortable shoes, you got to be in shape. Like, several of them are like runners, they do races, and they're like, yeah, that's part of the training for the job as a reporter, is you got to be able to keep up with the people you're trying to interview. It's very
That's fair.
important. So
That's fair.
anyway,
Anyway.
all right, and then we get to the PowerPoint, which the PowerPoint is basically the FBI's collection of evidence in 10 points, which they delineate one by one. We're not going to, do you want to go through that? I don't want to go through that.
Letters, aliases, inmates that he spoke to, cyanide knowledge. Apparently he wanted to start there was a company plan for a pill press business. Fingerprint on the cyanide book, which he didn't talk about. They found a book on page whatever, it was talking about cyanide, potassium cyanide, and they found his fingerprint on it. But it was a book in his house, so like, to be honest, he was thumbing through. I don't think that's good enough evidence, but anyway. The drawings, and then a toxicologist was saying that the drawings made sense.
Yep.
And then we got 2 new points. So our 2 main points that they're speaking about in this episode is 9 and 10. 9 is the motive. And in this part, we're coming back to Tony. So reminder, Tony is Jim Lewis's 5-year-old daughter who died after having a surgery on her heart. Apparently in the autopsy of Tony, it revealed that the sutures in her heart had torn. And at that stage, the sutures, when that had happened, the sutures, can't remember what they were called. There was like a name on them, but they were also trademarked by J&J or Johnson & Johnson. That was one time when I paused. I paused it and I was like, whoa. But then they follow it up by saying, like, from what they've spoken to friends and family or whatever they've spoken to of Jim Lewis's, they didn't think that he was aware of that around the time of the Tylenol murders.
No, they said that he would have had access to the autopsy report. But yeah, I mean, I think the FBI's presumption is that that's the motive. It's a revenge motive against Johnson & Johnson, but it's a little thin.
It's very thin.
I mean, obviously, like, the death of his daughter is a tragedy, and
100%.
But it's the connection there. I mean, this is point 9 of 10 in this PowerPoint. And I actually thought point 10, which was this video, or a couple of videos from this like sting operation by the FBI, was also, to me, sounded thin.
Thin.
So there's 2 videos. The first video is where they take Lewis into one of the Walgreens where the Tylenol was sold. So this happens sometime in the recent past, but they go into this Walgreens from where in 1982 the Tylenol was sold, and the sort of suspicious part is that Lewis goes to the back wall of the Walgreens, which is where the Tylenol used to be, right? In 1982, that's where they kept the Tylenol. It's not where they keep the Tylenol now, and that somehow is suspicious. And then the second video is
then he leaves the Walgreens and apparently says, that was just like deja vu, and I haven't had this sense of excitement since I met my birth mother. So like, that was a bit weird, but also I just think I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was very thin still.
I agree. And the second video is him in a hotel, like Sheraton or something, where an agent is talking to him about the timeline of the extortion letter he sent, where they're able to date that letter was sent on October 1st. Killings happened on September, 3 days before September 28th. But he said he spent 3 days working on the letter. And so the whole premise of this being like motive or whatever is he spent 3 days working on it, but that means he would have started working on this letter the day the killings happened, but that day it wasn't in the news yet. Therefore, like, he couldn't have been working on it for 3 days. I don't know.
I did think that was interesting-ish. Like, it wasn't in the news yet, so it happened on a Wednesday. On the Thursday, it was released to the news media, but seemingly Jim Lewis had always said he heard about it first from the afternoon paper on the Friday. Yeah. So he would have only had 1 day, and there was a lot of research and stuff that went into the letter. So I found that, slightly interesting. But at the end of the day, it's all circumstantial. And, there's just so much missing evidence. They can't even place him in Chicago.
So, yeah. So they list this at the end. I thought this was interesting. So the FBI says they have what they call chargeable circumstantial case from this task force 2. But at the same time, the reason that they never actually pursued it was there's no physical evidence that ties him to it. There's no actual fingerprint or everything. There's no DNA. There's no witnesses. Yeah, they can't actually put Jim Lewis in Chicago. They tried real hard and they couldn't actually say that he was definitely there. Plus, there is the second suspect, Roger Arnold. So, like, if they were to bring this to some sort of trial, like, if you're the defense attorney, you can have a field day with that, right? Like, so this happened all in 2022, which is the same time that this podcast Unsealed comes out. And yeah, that's kind of the end of it.
That was exhausting.
So do you know what happened after the podcast came out? Did you look this up?
No.
Jim Lewis, he died shortly after this came out. He died in he was age 76. He died in July of 2023. So roughly 6 months after the podcast comes out. So they kind of end the podcast saying, like, well, so far no one's been charged. Roger Arnold is dead. Jim Lewis hasn't been charged, and now Jim Lewis is dead too. So
yeah,
presumably no one's ever going to get charged in this crime. It's just going to remain an open case.
Which is infuriating, obviously. Like, can only imagine. Like, and it did circle back to the victim's family at the end of episode 8, which I liked. I thought it was important to, like, kind of bring it back to the victims' families at the end, and basically, like, how it's just so upsetting that, like, no one has ever been found out for this.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it didn't seem like it was horrendous policing at the very start. There was obviously a few missteps, but, like, it didn't seem to be horrendous policing at the start. I think it was just, I don't know. Who do you think did it? So you think Jim Lewis did it?
I feel like the podcast is kind of designed to make you think that Jim Lewis did. I feel like that the two reporters are convinced that he did it, and that the Roger Arnold thing is more of a distraction that the Chicago police go down. But you think Roger Arnold did it?
I mean, like, I just think it feels more aligned with, like, yeah, I think it was him. I think it was Arnold.
I don't know.
If I had to guess. But tell me now, what about the hosts? Do you think they did a good job?
No.
Ooh.
No. I don't know. I feel like there's so much plot. There's so many people. There's so many details, and it's spread across so many episodes. I mean, I listened to this whole podcast start to finish twice. And I still struggled to keep track of who everybody was, what was going on. There were a lot of, I think, really interesting, really memorable points. I think some of it was presented really well. I think on the whole, like, I struggled with this one. I think I thought about it a couple points of, like, would I be more engaged with this if it was just presented a little bit differently? Like, if it was presented in a little bit more kind of, I don't know, like, lively, exciting way. Not that I'm, like, wanting them to, like, hyper, like, dramatize it, but I thought it was a little flat at times where I just sort of, like, zoned out a little bit and realized I had to, like, jump back and listen to a section again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of have some similar notes on it. Like, I think they, like, seemed good overall. Like, I don't necessarily have any negatives on them, but I think maybe they were a bit too polished. Like, they're obviously reporters. I didn't feel like we got any of their, like, personalities coming out in it, which I feel like previously we've seen it done really well, where you get some personality plus the story being told. And I totally agree. There was far too much plot. There was far too much they were trying to cover, far too many characters they were trying to bring in and give backstories for this, that, and the other. It was just all too much.
So I agree with most of that. I don't fault them for not putting their personality in it. Like, we listened to what I think Keith Morrison, and the thing about Pam is the most personality you can probably get, right? Like,
we love Keith Morrison.
We adore Keith Morrison. He's amazing. But I think some of the other ones, like, I think we talked about this. I want to say we talked about this with the Retrievals, where I know we talked about this in the first episode of the Retrievals, where the host really kind of, like, was in the background. right? And I think what they were trying to do could have worked. I think it could have worked better. I think my main problem was just that it was like what you said at the beginning of this episode, where it was too many people who were too tangential. There's just too many of them, right? Like it would be better if they maybe cut the number of people they interviewed in half.
Yeah.
Cut maybe the number of episodes by some amount, maybe not half, but like.
Okay, so I have a reformat for us. I feel
this is
like
becoming a theme of what we do, where we send some notes over. Do you want to write to the Chicago Tribune?
I feel like the first episode was good. It was solid. We felt good about it. Like we were intrigued. So the first episode is focused on the victims, and the story mainly focused on the victims. I think we should have done Suspect 1, all we know about Jim Lewis from start to finish, or Arnold from start to finish. Suspect 2, all we know about the other guy from start to finish. A little bit about the police. Maybe they're like, not like all about their turf war, don't hear it, but like a little bit about them. And then like the where are we now? I think the rest could have been cut.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Do you want to let them know?
Yeah. I'll send them a strongly worded email. I'll CC you on it.
You could send a handwritten letter where it's all caps and letters slope to the right or to the left.
Will I draw a picture? I'll get my son to draw a picture. He'll be better at it than I will.
Actually, wait. No, better idea. Make a PowerPoint.
Oh. Oh, yeah. Anyway.
All right, wait. So would you recommend that people, if they haven't listened to this, go and listen to this podcast? You're thinking about it.
I don't know.
You know what's interesting about this?
I would recommend people to listen to it, but maybe put like episode 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 on like ×2 speed to like brush through it really quickly. 1 and 4 are solid.
Yeah.
They were my faves. I thought those episodes were done really well.
I agree with that. I actually think I think back to what we said about 1. Like I think I was, and this happens I think a fair amount, and this is becoming a bit of a trend where episode 1 is sort of an outlier. And episode 1 is really well produced, really engaging. I would not speed that episode up. I would listen to that at just a 1 speed. Yeah. And maybe that's just like, is that symptomatic of just episode 1 focusing more on the victims, and that's the most compelling thing?
I don't know.
That'll be interesting to see going forward if we see that come up again. Because I also think, I mean, the other thing that you said that you were really intrigued by was the Raymond West story, right? Like,
loved that. That's episode 4.
Hearing the stories of some of these, and then also the person that Roger Arnold killed.
Jack Stanislaw.
Yeah, like those stories. I mean, the same thing for me. I think those are the stories that stand out. I think hearing about some of these victims is the most captivating thing. Yep. More so than the police sort of struggling to
share,
to solve.
Yeah, sharing is caring.
Sharing
We're trying to teach it here. Next time, we're going back to Ireland. Yay.
Specifically, Toormore, Skull, County Cork, Ireland.
Why did we give you that? We'll preview the Audible original podcast, West Cork.
How does someone get murdered in a small town in an isolated part on the edge of Ireland and no one can solve the case?
Join us next time on So Much Crime,
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.